This is John Larry again. This video is entitled The Pharma PBM Two-Step. As I've discussed here, the simple scheme behind all these massive US brand drug price increases is one in which the drug companies and the insurance companies, PBMs, the four dominant ones, have been partners in massively raising prices and passing the costs on to us. And they're doing it in a very simple way in which the drug companies are paying a percentage of each and every massive sticker price increase of drugs for a very long time now, 10 to 15 years, to these insurance PBMs. And they're not telling any of us, and they're keeping all of that and passing on the cost. And the scheme began with Medicare Part D. Okay? The whole key to this thing is keeping secrecy, right, which they've done an unbelievable job of doing. The second key also is to create a lot of confusion out there, what's really going on. Make things seem really complicated, create all sorts of confusion, and keep the status quo, right? I'm sure a lot of you out there are frustrated like me. We read article on article on article after drug pricing. They just talk about the same stuff over again, and it gets rehashed, and nothing ever seems to change, and no action gets taken. Well, that's kind of by design, okay? And I want to talk about some of these issues that are out there to give you some perspective as someone who's been doing this for 30 years. And I will tell you, just like this scheme, it's not nearly as complicated as they would make you believe, which I think is also a positive for basically affecting change down the road. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the things that the pharma and the PBM ministry are out there talking about repeatedly. First one I always notice is this: people commonly talk about how drug pricing is so complex, how could we possibly do anything about it? So then we'll just study it for the next 20 years as people are hurt and nothing ever changes. Okay? Usually that argument I hear from people who are closely affiliated with the drug industry. And usually they start off by putting up some kind of a big chart. It's called a flow chart. And they put everybody who's involved in drug pricing in any way, the patients, doctors, nurses, wholesalers, pharmacies, right, the government, PBMs, all on a chart. It's called a flow chart. They arrows pointing everywhere. And then, by the end, it's just like, oh, this is so complex. What could we possibly do? I always find that interesting because, it just makes it's designed to create confusion. And I would tell you from someone doing this, it's not that complicated. There's a simple rule when you're someone like me who's a doctor and a financial analyst. Simple rule in getting to the bottom of things. Follow the money. Follow the money, right? Who's making money off these massive price increases and how are they doing it? That was the start of what my investigation began with. And when you do that, it becomes a lot simpler when you look at one of these big charts. I'll just tell you simply that 80-90% of the money related to these massive drug price increases is going between two parties. The drug companies that make the drugs and set the prices, and the insurance companies, PBMs, that are supposed to be negotiating on our behalf. And they're not doing that for a long time now. Okay? Those are the two people that matter. And in the PBM insurance land, that's become much simpler because there used to be more confusion about these separate PBMs. Now they're all part of big insurance companies, right? All in one. Just four companies control 80-90% of the market in Part D where this began, and in the private insurance market. United Healthcare, CVS Aetna, Cigna Express Scripts, and Humana. Simple. Okay? That's where the money is, that's where the action is. Okay? That's where these fees are going back and forth. Okay? Second thing is that there's a lot of confusion out there in the drug land now because there's a lot of moving parts, particularly between generic drugs and brand drugs. There's a whole nother world of games going on with PBMs regarding generic drugs, particularly the harm they're doing to independent pharmacists who are really being harmed by those things and other things. And it's also the drugs that the average person like me, who's relatively healthy, would deal with on a daily basis, right? If you aren't horribly sick with a bad disease, you're mostly dealing with generic antibiotics if you get a cold or something, or generic antihistamines or things like that. And so we've all experienced, situations where you go in and all of a sudden the drug that used to cost $10 a prescription is, $100 or $150. And what happened, right? That's routine, right? And that's what we're most experiencing. But you got to remember, 90% of the prescriptions in this country are generic, because a lot of things went off patent 10 years ago. But still only 15, maybe 20% at most of the costs are generic drugs, okay? So even though it affects most of it on a daily basis, it's not what's actually driving the market. The real driver of the market remains the brand drug market, right? Despite massive patent expirations and volume of prescriptions in the United States for brand drugs being only 10% of the market now, still accounts for 85% of the costs and the revenues. And all of that, I'll tell you, in the last 10 years has been driven by the massive increase in costs because the number of brand prescriptions has plummeted, all right? Which is central to this whole scheme I uncovered. Within brand drugs, it's even more narrow than that. The big driver of the entire pharmaceutical industry in terms of revenue growth and R&D, all the new drug development, is what's called specialty drugs. Right? Specialty drugs is just another name for something that costs a real lot of money, right? Thousands and thousands of dollars a patient. And usually it's for people with very severe diseases, right? And people who are living with this know. Multiple sclerosis, cancer, arthritis, rare diseases, all this stuff, you know, drugs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars now. That's the new model in the drug industry and the PBM industry, okay? Those specialty drugs count for only 1 to 2% of prescriptions in this country, treating only 1 to 2% of patients with severe diseases, you know, and it counts now for 40 to 50% of all the costs in this country. Okay, and all the growth in the last decade. Because regular brands, pills and stuff went off patent. A lot of them did. So that's the big driver. Other thing to keep in mind is that these 4 dominant PBMs I've told you about that control our marketplace, United Healthcare, Cigna Express Scripts, CVS, Aetna, and Humana, they have taken almost complete control of these super expensive specialty drugs in Part D and the private market. And they have cut out the independent pharmacists out of brand, these expensive drugs almost completely, okay? And they've done that by having, you know, networks where you can only get it filled at their pharmacy. And the main way they've done it is by the escalating use of what are called mail order specialty pharmacies. 85% of these super expensive are done by mail order, okay? Okay? Mail order, and that's by design to control the access. It's not coincidence. Also, this is where most of these secret fee payments now from drug companies to these dominant PBMs is going for these specialty drugs. And I'll show you in another video. They're making thousands and thousands of dollars per patient on these high-cost drugs. And the question is, what are they doing for that? Many of them, they're getting a lot more money for doing a lot less work, the whistleblower cases. But there's lots of other drugs, newer drugs, where they're getting enormous amounts of money, you know, perhaps for just shipping something to your house. So that's the center of all this. Remember that. So it's about brand drugs. Within it, it's about these specialty drugs, right, that are driving everything. And it's PBMs, insurance companies, and the pharma industry. Okay? That's really what it's all about. That's what's driving everything in this industry. And that's the center of this scheme. Okay, so complexity. Second argument you hear from the drug industry all the time is about, well, these prices are so high because we're so innovative. Well, I will tell you that's categorically false. In actuality, these massive price increases have occurred for the exact opposite reason. There hasn't been innovation, enough of it. So what happened was 10 years ago when Part D came and everything went generic, right? They were dependent upon a very small number of brands that were severely in trouble because of competition. No one's using them. And the only way to keep revenues and profits up, stock prices up, while they hope for new products, was to massively raise prices on these handful of remaining brands, many of which no one was using anymore. Therein lies the problem. And they had to find a secret way to pay the PBMs, which controlled Part D and the private sector. And that's why they did this whole scheme regarding these secret fees. Okay, remember, there's no rebates on generic drugs. So they had to shift their whole business model. Okay, so innovation. Related to this innovation argument, they often like to talk about how, well, the real problem is Europe's not charging enough, which is really a ridiculous argument. Prices for these old brand drugs were the same price in America and in Europe before this scheme began with Medicare Part D. Now we're paying 8 to 10 times as much in America for insulins, MS drugs, all this other stuff, and they haven't budged at all in Europe, right? And the reason they didn't budge there is because these products had severe competition and they should never have gone up. Instead, we allowed this scheme to happen, secret scheme, and we've been horribly harmed. It has nothing to do with innovation. It was caused by a lack of innovation, right? And the massive price increases on these old drugs in the US set the stages for even higher prices on new drugs, which has even accelerated the crisis in recent years. Okay? The main thing that pharma and the PBMs have done in recent years is what I call the blame game, right? In reality, they're secret partners and have been for a long time. So they, as the crisis is in the public uproar, just blaming each other. Oh, you're the bad guy, you're the bad guy, we're the good guy, right? Both claiming they're acting in the public interest and the other one's doing bad things. Again, that's just all theater, sad theater, really. Drug companies say, oh, we're giving big rebates, they're not giving them to their clients, they're raising co-pays, all this stuff, right? We're really not making the money, they are. PBMs say the exact opposite. They're really not giving us rebates, and we're not keeping them anyway. All this stuff back and forth, right? The reality is that if you read through the tea leaves, they're actually incriminating themselves, because what they have admitted publicly now is that the rebates don't really matter anymore. The PBMs don't make a lot of money on those, right? And that the rebates have been very low on a lot of these very, very expensive drugs. 0 on a lot of cancer drugs, less than 10% on a lot of really expensive specialty drugs. And I will tell you, bottom line, there's only 2 ways for these PBMs to make money on brand drugs, real money. And that's on the rebates, keeping part of it for the legitimately negotiating for us, or these secret fees. Before Part D, it was all rebates. That's how they made all their money, from pharma as well. Secretly, in their partnership, they switched to these secret fees without telling anybody. Now they make almost all their money on brand drugs on these secret fees tied to the prices. That's the reality of it all. Closing on this video, I want to say a couple things. It's always important to note what these industries actually agree on, right, and what they won't really talk about. There's only a couple things the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance PBM absolutely agree on. And one of them, shouldn't be a surprise, they both agree that Medicare Part D has been an astounding success in America, a role model for other government programs. Despite the fact, right, that it was billed that they would get better prices than the government could get, right, like the VA and Medicaid, right? Those programs, importantly, prevent brand drugs from going up more than 3% or 2 to 3%, the inflation rate after they're launched. No limits in Part D. After 14 years of Part D, right? Now all these old drugs cost, 7 to 8, 9 times more in Medicare Part D than in Medicaid and VA, just like with Europe. I don't think most of us consider that a big success, right? One of the things I won't talk about here, but it's in the complaints, the documents, most of the high spending people on these high cost specialty drugs and Medicaid were forced into Medicare Part D, so they're actually paying a lot more money. We are, the government, it's mostly paid by taxpayers, for treating those patients with bad diseases, disabled patients mostly, than if they just stayed in Medicaid. I don't think most people consider that a success. The other thing that the drug industry and the PBMs absolutely agree on is that there's no way we can disclose our transactions between us, because if we did, we'd be at a competitive disadvantage. And their main argument, believe it or not, is that if we disclose what we're really doing regarding rebates and other things, drug prices would go up. Now I find that gallows humor entertaining, because I always think they would go up. You mean more than tenfold like they've been doing? I mean, it's really kind of silly. But of course, it's all about just keeping the secrets about what they're really doing behind the scenes, that they're close partners in raising the prices and desperately trying to keep it secret. Okay? On the positive side, this is not a complicated scheme, as I've said. Okay? It's just about opening up a little crack in the window to see what's going on. It can be done very, very easily. Just have to bring the right people in, ask a couple of straight questions about how you're making money. And I'm telling you the answer already, okay? Secret fees, they're partners. Thank you for watching this video.